right. Rafe.
Okay. I'm not being told to be
hang on. Let me just bring Rafe. Hang on, Femi. Let me bring Rafe Heydel-Mankoo on. Rafe, I know where Femi's coming from when he's saying that the balance has been that we have to somehow taper the success of Shakespeare because of the harms of colonialism. But we're also losing sight of the fact that he was a brilliant writer, and there's something to be celebrated there.
Let's watch Rafe Heydel-Mankoo, brilliant historian, destroy Femi on the question of Shakespeare. Should we cancel Shakespeare and just disregard all of his achievements because that is apparently white supremacy?
Yes, absolutely. Look, Shakespeare is a global phenomenon because he speaks to his plays are universal and they have timeless insights into the human character, and they deal with issues that are just as relevant today and enduring themes of, love, war, family squabbles, and everything else. And we know that because, you see, Shakespeare is a global phenomenon, even in places like China and Japan, which have fiercely proud, patriotic populations and a great history of literature in their own right. India as well, the Mahabharata, the Ramayana, and so forth. But even they understand the universality of Shakespeare as the world's greatest writer. In fact, the Chinese asked this very same Shakespeare Birthplace Trust for permission to rebuild Shakespeare's home in China using Elizabethan techniques. They have national festivals about Shakespeare in Japan as well. And you had Kurosawa, the greatest director in Japan, doing Macbeth also. That's the universality over here. And the criticism that's being put out by this research, by the trust and so forth, is that presenting Shakespeare as the world's greatest genius presents European culture as the world standard for high art. And I'm sorry, but Western culture is the standard for much high art. That's why so many Asians play European classical music, for example. Now, that wasn't the case when Shakespeare was alive. In the 16th century, Asia was the global powerhouse and cultural powerhouse, and Elizabethan England was a cultural backwater. But for the last 300 years, Europe and the West has stood head and shoulders above every other civilization. Femi mentions African authors. There are 2,000 languages in Africa, but as Femi's pointed out, most of those were oral. 80% of African languages don't have a written tradition, so they weren't capable of producing a Shakespeare. The most profound and sophisticated music, art, and culture has come from the West, and we need to lose the embarrassment and be proud to admit the genius of the West. Celebrate that Shakespeare was an Englishman, and that's what sticks in the craw of the anti-Western ideologues that run our cultural institutions, because they cannot stand that an Englishman is the greatest writer that the world has ever produced, and they will do anything to diminish and downplay that achievement.
It's a pretty impressive defense of Shakespeare there from Rafe, using his great historical knowledge. He's a great commentator. But what do you think? Did Rafe manage to destroy Femi there? So basically, if you're not aware, this has come after we found out this week that Shakespeare's Birthplace is going to be, quote, decolonised after white supremacy fears. So we had some lady, some academic, wrote some piece saying that we need to decolonize the attractions that they have at Shakespeare's Birthplace, run by Shakespeare's Birthplace Trust, because apparently if we portray Shakespeare as one of the best writers in the world, and we portray British culture when it comes to art, literature, playwriting, etc., if we portray that as superior to that of other cultures, then that is white supremacy. It's white European supremacy is what they said. So, Rafe pointed out the fact there that African languages, most of them are not even written, yet apparently we can't say that British literature is superior to African literature, because that's racism and that is white supremacy. And it's not just people online, it's not just people like Femi and wokies who are asking for this to happen. It is actually happening because the Shakespeare Birthplace Trust, the people who take care of his birthplace and present it to the public, you'd think they present it proudly, but oh no, they have agreed to decolonize it and water down the achievements of Shakespeare. And they'll probably instead just paint him out as some evil colonizer, basically, and give a damning verdict on him. It's pretty sad to see, really, the West essentially hating itself and destroying itself. Anyway, I'm Chloe Dobbs. Thank you very much for watching. Subscribe if you haven't already.